Okay, so today we're diving deep into a theory that says global politics doesn't have to be just a constant power struggle. Like, maybe there's a chance we can actually have real dialogue and understanding between nations.
Yeah.
Wild thought, right?
It is ambitious.
It is ambitious. That's the vision of critical theory.
Exactly.
And that's what this deep dive is all about.
For sure.
To help us out today, we've got excerpts from two of Andrew Linklater's works.
Okay.
The Achievements of Critical Theory and Critical Theory. And I'm already getting the feeling that we're going to have some big aha moments.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Linklater, he really breaks it down.
Yeah.
One of the most important things to start with is this challenge to positivism.
Okay.
Basically, critical theory argues that all knowledge, it has a purpose. It's not just neutral observation like we tend to think.
Wait, so you're saying that everything we think we know about the world is actually like shaped by whoever created that knowledge?
Yeah, basically.
That's kind of scary.
It is a little bit unsettling, right? So critical theory forces us to ask, like, whose interests are really being served by the way we understand the world? And here's the really big question.
Yeah.
How does our understanding of the world actually shape the world itself?
Wow.
So like some theories, they might seem objective, but they can actually end up just justifying the way things already are with power structures.
It's like those maps. You know, people say they don't just describe the place, they actually influence how we move around in it.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
And critical theory takes that even further.
Okay.
It challenges this whole idea that power structures are permanent and unchanging.
Okay, so things like the way the world's divided into nation states.
Exactly.
We just kind of take that for granted.
Yeah, but critical theory says, hey, let's question that assumption.
Okay.
Let's look for possibilities for transformation.
So it's not just about analyzing what is, but like daring to imagine what could be.
You got it.
Okay.
Like, think about how many of those traditional theories, like neorealism, for example, they just accept this idea of constant international anarchy.
It's kind of a depressing picture, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like countries are forever stuck in this game of chess, always having to protect themselves, never really trusting each other.
Right. It's like this inevitable anarchy.
Yeah.
But critical theory says, what if that's not the only way?
Yeah, okay.
What if cooperation isn't naive, but actually the only way forward? What if we could build new systems based on like shared values and goals?
It's like we're stepping off the chessboard entirely and coming up with a whole new game.
Exactly, and this is where its connection to Marxism comes in.
Okay, so is this where I need to dust off my copy of Das Kapital?
Well, hold on, before you do that.
Okay.
It's really important to get that critical theory. It is inspired by Marx. But it doesn't just focus on class struggle as the only thing driving history.
Okay, so it's widening the lens a little bit.
Exactly.
Looking at other forms of exclusion and oppression.
Right, it brings other things into focus, like gender and race, and even the concept of nationhood. Like Habermas, for example.
Yeah.
He shifted the focus away from this paradigm of production to the paradigm of communication.
So instead of just looking at who controls the resources,
Yeah.
it's more about how people communicate and understand the world and how that can create change.
Exactly. That's a really important distinction.
Okay.
And that leads to one of the most, I think, hopeful concepts in critical theory, which is discourse ethics.
Discourse ethics. Okay. I like the sound of that. Tell me more.
Imagine a United Nations where the best argument wins,
Okay.
not the country with the biggest army.
Okay.
So that's the radical hope of discourse ethics.
Wow.
It envisions a world where open dialogue actually helps us figure out what's morally right, and decisions are made based on how good the arguments are, not just raw power.
That sounds amazing, but kind of impossible.
Yeah.
Like in the real world?
Right. It's definitely an ideal.
Yeah.
And some people criticize it for being too idealistic, especially with all the power imbalances that we see in the world.
But think about Habermas's concept of ideal speech,
Oh, okay.
where everyone actually has an equal chance to participate, to be heard.
So even if we can't achieve that perfectly,
Yeah.
it gives us a way to measure how far we are from really, truly open communication.
Exactly. It gives us a framework for seeing and then challenging those power imbalances that prevent that kind of open dialogue from happening in the first place.
So whose voices are being silenced, whose interests are being ignored?
Exactly. It helps us ask those questions.
So this idea of questioning boundaries and power, where does that take us?
It leads us to this concept of bounded communities.
Bounded communities. Is that just a fancy word for countries?
Well, it's a little broader than that.
Okay.
It's talking about any group that creates boundaries defines who's in and who's out.
Okay.
Obviously, the modern nation state.
Yeah, with that emphasis on national identity.
Exactly. That's a prime example.
Yeah.
But it could also be religious communities, ethnic groups, even social classes.
So whether those boundaries are physical or just in people's minds,
Yeah.
it creates that sense of us versus them.
Right. And that's where you often find the potential for conflict.
Hmm.
So critical theory challenges these boundaries and says, hey, let's think about more inclusive forms of community.
Okay, so breaking down those walls literally and figuratively.
Yes. It's about recognizing our shared humanity.
Okay.
And this connects to some really interesting debates about cosmopolitan democracy.
Cosmopolitan democracy.
Imagine a system where people have a say in decisions that affect them,
Okay.
regardless of where they live.
So like a global democracy where everyone's voice matters.
Yeah, it's a pretty bold vision.
It is, especially with the way global politics are right now.
It is. It's a monumental challenge.
Yeah.
But that's what critical theory encourages us to do.
Okay.
It says, let's think beyond the limits of the current system
Yeah.
and envision what other possibilities are out there.
It really makes you think differently about how we define community in this day and age.
It does.
You know, with globalization and the internet connecting us in so many ways.
Maybe the idea of a nation state with these hard boundaries, it's becoming less relevant.
That's a really interesting thought and exactly the kind of question that critical theory makes us think about.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing. I feel like we've covered so much already.
Yeah.
Challenging positivism, questioning power structures, the role of communication, and expanding how we think about community.
It has a lot to take in.
It is. Is there anything else that critical theory brings to the table?
Yeah, one of the most thought-provoking aspects, and maybe the one that really resonates most deeply with our shared humanity, is this idea of solidarity and suffering.
Solidarity and suffering. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So critical theory says recognizing our shared vulnerability and suffering, that can actually be a really powerful foundation for global solidarity.
So even though we're separated by borders and cultures and languages, we're all connected by the fact that we experience pain, loss, joy, the whole spectrum of being human.
Exactly. And seeing that can help us move past our own self-interest and work towards a more just and compassionate world.
Okay.
Think about the work of Adorno. He was really impacted by the horrors of the Holocaust. And he believed that recognizing our shared vulnerability was crucial to preventing those kinds of atrocities from happening again.
So it's like a call for empathy on a global scale.
It is.
A reminder that the suffering of others, even people who seem really different from us, we can't ignore that.
Exactly. And this connects to what Adorno called a new categorical imperative.
A new categorical imperative. I remember learning about Kant's categorical imperative.
Yeah.
That idea that you should act in a way that you could will everyone to act in the same way.
Right.
Is this building on that?
It is. It emphasizes the importance of preventing suffering and seeing the inherent dignity of every human being.
So it's not just about abstract principles, but actually doing things that prevent harm and promote the well-being of others. Okay, so this idea of solidarity and suffering could actually be a force for positive change in international relations.
Yeah, it's a really powerful idea.
Especially in a world where there's so much conflict and division.
Right. It reminds us that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can find strength in our shared vulnerability and in compassion.
Wow, you've given me a lot to think about, this whole idea of challenging truth that's a bit unsettling, but also really exciting.
Yeah.
I'm definitely ready to hear more about how critical theory can be applied to real-world problems in international relations.
Well, there's a lot more to explore. For example, we could look at how critical theory has been used to analyze things like colonialism and global capitalism, and even the rise of new forms of global governance.
Okay, so that sounds like a whole other deep dive.
It is.
Maybe we'll save that for another episode.
Yeah.
But for now, this has been a fantastic introduction to the core ideas of critical theory.
I agree. It's definitely complex.
Yeah.
But it's such a powerful framework for understanding global politics. It's not just about power and conflict. It encourages us to think critically about the world and see the possibilities for change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's given me a lot to think about, this idea that power structures aren't unchangeable.
Right.
It's like critical theory gives us permission to imagine a better world and then start building it.
Yeah, it really does.
Okay, wow.
Welcome back to our deep dive into critical theory.
Okay, I'm still processing everything from that last part.
It's a lot to think about, isn't it?
It is. Critical theory can really make you question things you thought were like set in stone.
It definitely challenges assumptions, and we've only just scratched the surface.
Okay, so where do we go from here? How do we apply these, like, critical lenses to real-world issues in international relations?
Well, let's look at how critical theory tackles the concept of the state.
The state. Okay.
Remember, critical theory, it scrutinizes all boundaries,
Right.
even the ones that we draw around national sovereignty.
So like those lines on the map that we just kind of take for granted?
Exactly. We need to look deeper. Linklater highlights two key approaches within critical theory.
Okay.
One, developed by Robert Cox,
Okay.
focuses on how states, especially those in the developing world, they can challenge the global capitalist system.
So it's kind of like a David and Goliath situation.
Yeah.
Less powerful states finding ways to push back against the big players.
That's a good analogy. These counter-hegemonic states, as Cox calls them,
Okay.
they're challenging that dominance of wealthy and powerful nations.
Makes me think of like historical movements,
Yeah.
like the non-aligned movement during the Cold War.
Exactly.
Countries trying to forge their own path
Uh-huh.
outside the influence of those superpowers.
That's a great example.
Okay.
But there's another approach,
Okay.
closer to Habermas's ideas, and this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
This one focuses on those internal tensions and challenges within a state itself, particularly in its relationship with its own citizens.
So not just external pressures, but also internal forces pushing for change within a country.
Precisely.
Okay.
So think about it, the modern state.
Yeah.
It depends on this idea of national unity, this shared identity that binds citizens together.
Okay.
But what happens when that unity starts to break down?
I mean, we're seeing it all over the world, aren't we?
We are.
With globalization and multiculturalism.
Yeah.
The old model of a homogenous nation state seems to be under strain.
You're exactly right. Linklater points out several developments that are weakening that traditional bond between citizens and their states.
It's like, what kind of developments?
Well, for one thing, warfare,
Okay.
particularly between major powers.
Yeah.
It's become less frequent. And war historically played a huge role in forging those national identities.
Right. That sense of shared purpose in the face of an enemy.
Exactly. You know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah.
But without that external threat,
Yeah.
those internal divisions, they become more pronounced.
Okay.
We see this in the rise of regionalism, separatist movements, demands for more autonomy from minority groups.
That's like the foundations of the nation state are starting to shift.
Exactly. And then you add in the impact of globalization,
Yeah.
which fragments those national cultures even further. People are exposed to a wider range of ideas, values, lifestyles.
Yeah. Okay.
Some people embrace this cosmopolitanism,
Yeah.
while others feel threatened by it.
It's like the world's becoming this giant melting pot.
Yeah.
And not everyone is happy with all the ingredients getting mixed together.
Right. And that discomfort can lead to a backlash, a retreat into more narrow and exclusive identities. So we have these competing forces,
Okay.
globalization pushing people together,
Yeah.
but this resurgence of nationalism pulling them apart.
It's a real tug of war.
Yeah.
So where does all this leave the future of the state?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
Is the nation state on its way out?
Yeah.
Critical theory doesn't give us any easy answers,
Okay.
but it gives us the tools to understand these really complex dynamics.
So how does Linklater approach this question of the state's future?
Well, he asks some really insightful questions.
Okay.
Like, what actually unifies people as members of a community? What defines their shared identity?
Okay.
How do they see their separateness from other communities?
Yeah.
How open are they to outsiders?
So he's really dissecting the nation state,
He is.
examining how it's built and what holds it together.
Exactly. And in doing so,
Yeah.
he's challenging us to think critically about this whole idea of the nation state.
Okay.
Is it becoming outdated? Can it adapt to the challenges of the 21st century?
Okay.
Or will it be replaced by new forms of political organization?
Those are some big questions.
They are. And it makes me think about the whole concept of citizenship.
Yeah, if the nation state is evolving, what does it even mean to be a citizen in this changing world?
That's a key question for critical theorists.
Go ahead.
They're interested in how we can create more inclusive forms of citizenship, ones that recognize the inherent rights of all people, regardless of their nationality.
So are we talking about like a move towards global citizenship?
It's definitely a possibility.
Okay.
And it ties back to that idea of cosmopolitan democracy we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
This system where everyone has a voice in the decisions that affect them,
Right.
even if those decisions are being made on the other side of the world.
I mean, that would be a challenge, wouldn't it?
Huge challenge, absolutely.
Given how global politics work right now.
For sure. But critical theory says, let's think beyond the limits of what we see today.
Yeah.
And imagine those alternative futures, even if they seem far-fetched right now.
So we've explored how critical theory challenges our ideas about the state.
Uh-huh.
It makes us rethink citizenship.
Yeah.
What about discourse ethics?
Okay.
That other key idea.
Yeah.
How does that actually work in the real messy world of international relations?
Well, remember discourse ethics.
Yeah.
It imagines a world where open and inclusive dialogue, that's the driving force behind deciding what's morally right.
Right. But like you said earlier, that ideal can be hard to achieve in practice.
It is.
I mean, the United Nations is supposed to be that forum for dialogue between nations,
Yeah.
but it often gets bogged down by power politics and self-interest.
That's true. And critics of discourse ethics,
Yeah.
they argue that it's too idealistic,
Okay.
that it doesn't account for those power imbalances that shape how things really work.
So they're saying that it's a nice idea, but ultimately not relevant to the real world.
Well, not necessarily.
Okay.
Even if we can't perfectly achieve that ideal of totally open and equal dialogue,
Yeah.
the concept of discourse ethics can still be a powerful tool for critique.
Critique. Okay, what do you mean by that?
It can help us identify those structures that prevent open dialogue from happening in the first place.
Okay.
It can shine a light on whose voices are being excluded, whose interests are being ignored.
So it's like holding up a mirror,
Yeah.
showing us how far we are from that ideal of genuine communication.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
It exposes the hypocrisy of these powerful actors who say they're all about dialogue, but at the same time, they're silencing dissenting voices.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, I get that.
Yeah.
But this concept of universal moral principles,
Yeah.
I'm still wrestling with that a bit.
Okay.
Like, how can we be sure those principles are truly universal
Yeah.
and not just reflecting one culture's values?
That is a fundamental question,
Yeah.
and one that's been debated a lot within critical theory itself.
Okay.
Critics argue that this search for universal principles, it can actually be a form of cultural imperialism,
Okay.
imposing one worldview on others.
Right. It's like, one man's meat is another man's poison.
Exactly. What's considered ethical in one culture might be totally unacceptable in another.
Yeah.
But supporters of discourse ethics, they know it's possible to find common ground.
Okay.
Even across really different cultures.
Okay.
They emphasize that it's not about dictating a specific set of values, but creating that framework where all voices can be heard and considered.
So it's not about controlling the outcome of the conversation,
Right.
but making sure the conversation itself is fair and open.
Precisely. It requires a willingness to engage with perspectives that might be different from our own,
Right.
to really listen and try to understand,
Yeah.
even if we don't agree in the end.
That sounds like a tall order.
It is a huge challenge, especially in today's world.
Yeah, where everything feels so polarized.
It does, but this is why critical theory is so important.
Okay.
It pushes us to confront those challenges,
Yeah.
to imagine new possibilities for communication and understanding, even across those really deep divides.
This is making me think differently about dialogue in global politics.
Yeah.
It's not just about negotiating treaties or resolving conflicts.
Right.
It's about building those relationships,
Yeah.
seeing things from different perspectives,
Yeah,
and finding that common ground
Yeah.
that can actually lead to real lasting change.
that's beautifully put. It really highlights the transformative potential of critical theory.
Yeah.
It's not just an academic exercise, it's a call to action.
Okay, so we've explored how critical theory challenges our ideas about the state,
Yeah.
pushes us to rethink citizenship,
Uh-huh.
and provides a framework for more ethical dialogue.
Right.
Is there anything else we should touch on before we wrap up this part?
Yeah, let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
And explore one of the most compelling aspects of critical theory.
Okay.
Its focus on suffering and solidarity.
Okay.
It brings a really deeply human element to how we understand global politics.
And that's something I'm really curious about.
Yeah, so critical theorists, drawing on thinkers like Adorno,
Okay.
they argue that our shared human experience of vulnerability and suffering, that can actually be a powerful basis for global solidarity.
So even though we're separated by all these things,
Right.
borders, cultures, languages,
Right.
we're all connected by the fact that we experience pain, loss, joy, Just the fragility of life itself.
Exactly. And recognizing that can help us move beyond just thinking about ourselves and work towards a more just and compassionate world order.
Okay.
Adorno, who was deeply impacted by the horrors of the Holocaust, he believed that recognizing our shared vulnerability was absolutely essential to preventing future atrocities.
It's like a call for empathy on a global scale.
It is.
A reminder that the suffering of others,
yeah,
even people who seem very different from us, we can't afford to ignore that.
We can't. And this ties into the idea of a new categorical imperative, as Adorno called it.
Okay, a new categorical imperative. So we talked about Kant's categorical imperative, which focuses on those universal moral principles.
Right. Acting in a way that you could will everyone else to act in the same situation.
Exactly.
So Adorno's new categorical imperative, it builds on that idea, but it emphasizes the importance of preventing suffering and recognizing that inherent dignity of every human being.
So it's not just about these abstract principles, but about concrete actions that prevent harm and promote the well-being of others.
That's the heart of it.
Okay.
And this idea of solidarity and suffering can be a really powerful force for positive change in international relations.
Okay.
It can motivate us to work towards a more just and equitable world where everyone's needs and rights are respected.
It's a really hopeful idea, especially in a world that often feels so dominated by conflict and division.
It is. It reminds us that even in those darkest times, the human spirit can find strength in our shared vulnerability and in compassion.
That's a powerful message.
It is.
And a perfect place to pause for now.
I agree.
We've explored some incredibly complex and challenging ideas.
We have.
And I'm excited to see what you have in store for the final part of our deep dive.
We'll pick up right where we left off and go even deeper into the implications of these ideas for creating a better world.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so ready for the final part of our deep dive into critical theory?
Let's do it.
We've talked about challenging the idea of objective truth, rethinking what the state even is, and exploring the power of dialogue.
Yeah.
So what's next on this journey?
Well, let's explore this idea of moral practical learning.
Moral practical learning.
Yeah, it's a concept that really brings everything together.
Okay, break that down for me. What are we talking about?
Okay, think about it this way. We're always learning, right?
Yeah.
Evolving our understanding of the world. But Habermas, he says there are different kinds of learning.
Okay.
There's this technical instrumental learning, which is about mastering nature, figuring out how things work so we can control our environment.
So scientific discoveries, technological advancements, it's all about gaining knowledge and putting it to practical use.
Right. But then there's this other kind of learning, moral practical learning.
Right.
And this is about how we learn to interact with each other,
Okay.
how we develop those ethical principles, and ultimately how we create a more just and fair world.
So it's not just about knowing how to build a nuclear reactor, but also understanding the ethics of it.
Exactly.
It's about the human side of knowledge.
It's acknowledging that knowledge, it's never neutral.
Yeah.
It always has a purpose. And that purpose, it can be used for good or for bad.
That connects back to what we were talking about before.
It does.
Challenging positivism, that idea of purely neutral observation.
Right.
Our values are always woven into what we know.
It's all connected. Moral practical learning is about recognizing that ideas, they have the power to shape the world.
Okay.
And we have to use that power responsibly.
So how does this moral practical learning actually happen? Do we take a class?
It's much bigger than that.
Okay.
It happens through dialogue, through social movement, through those moments when we're challenging norms and pushing for real change.
Like the civil rights movement, the fight for women's suffrage.
Exactly.
Those struggles that really changed how we think about justice and equality.
Those are perfect examples.
Yeah.
These movements weren't just about changing laws. They were about changing hearts and minds.
Yeah.
Expanding who we see as worthy of moral consideration.
So pushing the boundaries of those bounded communities we talked about.
You got it.
Chipping away at those barriers between us and them.
And it's an ongoing process.
Okay.
There's no finish line for moral practical learning.
So we're always learning.
We are.
Always evolving.
It's about questioning assumptions, staying open to new ideas, and always striving for a more just and compassionate world.
Okay. I like that idea, but looking at the world today,
yes,
all the conflict and division.
It's tough.
It's hard to see how we get there. How does this connect to international relations specifically?
It's true. The challenges are huge, but critical theory offers this little glimmer of hope.
Okay.
It says that through dialogue, through really engaging with different viewpoints and recognizing our shared humanity, we can move towards a more peaceful and just world order.
So not a utopia where there's no conflict.
Right.
But a world where we find more ethical ways of dealing with that conflict.
Exactly. And moral practical learning is a big part of that.
Okay.
It's about understanding that the way we see the world, the ideas we hold, they have real power.
So changing mindset's not just material conditions.
It's inner work as much as outer action.
Yeah.
And this is where discourse ethics comes back in.
Okay.
It gives us that framework for dialogue, for challenging those assumptions.
Yeah.
And finding ways to bridge those divides.
It makes me think about intercultural dialogue, trying to find common ground between different religions and cultures.
That's a great example.
It's hard, but so important.
It is, and it shows how important it is to really listen to people who have been marginalized, whose voices haven't been heard.
Yeah.
Moral practical learning means making space for those voices.
Okay.
So they can be heard and help shape our understanding.
So recognizing that everyone,
Yeah.
no matter their background or beliefs, has something to teach us.
Exactly. That's the beauty of it.
I love that.
And it's a process that can lead to real change.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen overnight,
Okay.
but every step we take, every challenge to injustice, we get a little closer to that vision of a better world.
We've explored so much about critical theory.
We have.
It's changed how I think about knowledge,
Yeah.
power communication,
Yeah.
our shared humanity.
Good.
But I have to ask, what does all this mean for me?
Yeah.
For the average person just trying to make sense of the world.
Right.
How do we put these ideas into practice?
That's the big question, right? Critical theory, it's not just an intellectual thing.
Okay.
It's a call to action. It's about empowering people to think critically about the world, to question assumptions, to challenge the things that perpetuate injustice.
So taking these big ideas
Yeah.
and putting them into action in our daily lives.
Absolutely. It's recognizing that we all have a role to play
Wow.
in creating a more just and fair world. It starts with small things. Talking to people who are different from us. Supporting movements that are fighting for justice.
Yeah.
Speaking out against injustice whenever we see it.
It's like that Margaret Mead quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world indeed. It's the only thing that ever has."
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Critical theory, it reminds us that change is possible,
Yeah.
but it takes action. It needs engagement, and it needs people who are willing to challenge the way things are.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
I'm glad.
I feel like I have a whole new way of understanding not just global politics, but also how I can contribute to a more just and fair world.
That's what it's all about, critical theory. It's a journey. It's a process of always learning and growing. And as we've seen, it's a journey that can lead to a more hopeful and compassionate future.
Well, thank you so much for guiding me on this journey.
You're welcome.
And to everyone listening out there, never stop questioning. Keep learning and keep working to make the world a better place.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Until next time, stay curious.